CD Projekt Red did everything right. Okay, maybe not everything, but in terms of anime production, they did kind of nail it. I was absolutely skeptical when I first heard about Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It's the reason this video's coming out a month late. But this wasn't a company that fell into the traps that so many other anime producer hopefuls have in the past. Neo Yokio by the Vampire Weekend Singer starring Jaden Smith was announced as a big production IG thing, but the US team had no idea how anime worked at all, didn't take it seriously, and it ended up, well, like this.
They love seeing us together.
People just can't get enough of other people standing on a red carpet.
On the other hand, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a true collaboration between the game developers and Studio Trigger, one with no real middlemen. Trigger respects the art and world of Night City, while CDPR respects that anime creators aren't going to give you back exactly what you asked for, because if you're lucky and you play your cards right, they'll give you something even better. Of course, CDPR are far from anime production experts. While series creator Rafal Yaki was a big anime fan and even spoke Japanese, most anime productions are started by people who, well, already work in the anime industry, not a game developer in Poland. He got approval to start talks for a Cyberpunk anime in 2016 and went to talk to studios, but without a lot of the details that they would be looking for. So he returned to Japan a year later for a revenge match, this time carrying a full animatic for a pilot. It's not normal for anime, but it was enough to get CDPR to fund the show outright and to convince studios to give it the time of day, and eventually send in offers, even if most were still skeptical about its viability. According to those Yaki spoke with, their initial pitch sounded more like a live-action project. In the end, it came down to either Production IG or Trigger, and this is the first and probably the most important thing CDPR got right. Most would go with IG. Production IG not only has historical prestige, but they're also much easier to work with. They have a branch in the USA, experience working with overseas partners, and most importantly, multiple production lines within their sub-studios. If they went with IG, the show would get made quicker, communication would be easier, and they would be able to brag that Edgerunners was made by the studio that made Ghost in the Shell, one of the game's major inspirations. But honestly, and with no disrespect to the teams there, IG is the basic bitch choice. Crunchyroll, Toonami, Netflix, Disney, Skydance, fucking Keanu Reeves. And there would have been absolutely no guarantee that they got the dream staff or end quality that they might have hoped for. With such a large studio, it's a total gamble. Sure, you can get the quality of early Haikyuu, or you get Noblesse. But on the other hand, while Trigger is fiercely independent and much smaller than IG,
they were the only one actually that really gave me shit for stuff that they thought were not there. And I'm like, yeah, that I like. This is what I can work with.
And this is what I love about the background of this show. A deference to anime creators at every stage, and an understanding that, hey, they know what's best. In terms of the story, CDPR kept throwing things at Trigger until it stuck, and even then, they eventually asked Trigger staff to rewrite the whole thing. That's why there's those weird credits like Story by and Script by. It's CDPR's general story, but not only did Trigger get to give feedback on the narrative beats, but the studio's president and vice president, both having worked as screenwriters before, rewrote it in the style of an anime, erasing any concerns about it feeling too much like a Hollywood script. This was a process that they had so much freedom with that they even just went ahead and added a new character, Rebecca. Today, she's not just a fan favorite character, but a favorite of the creators too. It's also worth noting, this all started out in 2017, and even if they couldn't start work immediately, this is more heads up than most production companies give, allowing them 2.5 years of just pre-production. Designs, scripts, backgrounds. Even though the game didn't come out until 2020, Trigger staff were given access to demos and a no-clip camera mode where they could check out all of the locations. That was the second major thing they got right. A lot of game adaptations will keep up communication regarding the story, but according According to the Persona 5 The Animation team, they had no idea what the game was actually like until it got closer to release, and then they had just over a year to make the whole show. Edgerunners overcomes this by not only having it be an original story, but also by constantly providing the anime creators with access to the game, behind the scenes materials, and lore. It's an ideal pre-production process. Because CDPR is a studio filled with artists themselves, they didn't just have to communicate with words. If they had an idea for how a character should look, they could draw it. If they wanted a bit of game-like UI, they could make it. Once Trigger had cleared its schedule, they went into full production. They had the storyboards, the designs, the artboards, the script, and so the third thing CDPR did right was back off. Anime production is intense, especially for a studio like Trigger with only one production line. If CDPR changed their mind at this stage, it'd mess up the schedules for Gridman Universe, Delicious in Dungeon, Panty Stocking, and a bunch of other unannounced projects. So they understood that once pre-production had ended, the time for feedback was over, so that the team could get on with actually making the show.
あんたやっぱいいわ。またね、デイビッド。
Edgerunners is beautiful. The lead's obsessed over light sources, creating this rim lighting around the characters that both lends to the cyberpunk aesthetic, while also helping to create visual motifs. Probably the most memorable example is the rooftop scene in episode 4. At first, they're lit in their own colours from the sides of the building, pink and green Splatoon 2 colours. But when they come together, when David declares that he'll take Lucy to the moon, they kiss, and suddenly their colours aren't their own anymore. This is the rim lighting telling us that their fates are intertwined, and it's called back to in their final scene together. In the same way, we have red as the colour of madness, and a mix between red and Lucy's colour pink also shows up at the Ripperdoc, drawing a connection to his reasons for wanting to become stronger. None of this is new to Trigger. They toyed with similar ideas in Brand New Animal, but it's a massive part of Edgerunners' identity. The show's led by Gainax veterans, Hiroyuki Imaishi in the director's chair, Yo Yoshinari as character designer and chief animation director. But this isn't the same Trigger as they once were. They're not calling up all their fellow boomers to help out like they did for Kill la Kill. In fact, even Imaishi only drew storyboards for the finale this time around. Because today, they've got a new generation of animation talent that have been trained within these walls, learning from the best of the best to create iconic scenes. Just as an example, you get people like Akihiro Sato, someone super new to the anime industry who went from newbie in-between artist to a star key animator in just a few years. He animates a lot of scenes in Cyberpunk, including the one in episode 1 where David loses his mother during a firefight on the road. Even with a greener staff, the fact that animators like Sato grew up watching Gainax and Trigger shows and then went on to study under their auteurs means Cyberpunk still feels singular. It's an anime that could have only come from here, and believe me, I don't get to say that a lot. The show is a visual feast, and in ways I didn't really expect. Netflix's marketing was hyper-focused on the show just being a montage of sex and violence, and while there is that, this is first and foremost a sympathetic show about downtrodden people, and it's a delight to watch them. Their frustrations, their smiles, their horror, their madness. It's in the character animation, it's in the layouts, and it's in the storyboards. I don't think it's much of a hot take to call episode 6 the highlight here. It's the third episode directed and boarded by animator Kai Igarashi, the first being on SSSS.Gridman, and the second being on Dynazenon. And each and every time it's been an event, a huge emotional climax, a turning point, delivered with a kind of visual introspection that's only possible in animation. Igarashi was already known as a standout animator for his exaggerated keyframes and sharp timing. He fits perfectly at Trigger. Before now, he'd only storyboarded for the Gridman series, my favourite thing Trigger's ever done. So that was what I was thinking. What can he do in the world of Night City? And as it turns out, he made something that feels devastating. Episode 6 is tense, uncomfortable, and shocking. Cyberpsychosis is just a chain of side quests in the game, but here it's portrayed in a heartbreaking way. Extreme close-ups here are giving us a feeling of both intimacy and bewilderment. They're all terrified, but not sure what to be the most scared of. The only ones who can really answer that question is the audience. We know how Maize is seeing the world right now, and we know how far gone he really is. With that said, it's absolutely gorgeous, and I didn't think I'd be saying that about the goriest episode of the show. Lucy's net running, the frantic character animation, the action choreography. Despite it being tense, despite it being frightening, the animation talent makes sure you won't look away for a second. I don't want to make out that Edgerunners is purely a trigger effort though, and there is more than just 2D animation to goggle at here. Fresh from her role as lead 3D animator on Trigger's latest show SSSS.Dynazenon, Graphinic's Natsumi Nagahama returns as 3D director on Edgerunners, ready to throw all the rules out of the window. Episode 3's car chase is my favourite example. None of this is based on anything in the game, or any idea of how real life cars move. It's entirely the result of employing the dynamic irregularity of the late Yoshinari Kaneda, something that flows through all of Trigger's works, to an entirely different workflow. Creator Rafal Yaki says that Trigger and CDPR are alike in that they're both independent creative companies. They also happen to be alike in that they both have a history of poor working conditions, something Yaki assured has not been a problem on Edgerunners specifically. But anyways, the two teams are also alike in a lot of ways. Most obviously, their styles. Prior to the release of the game, the word realistic came up in a lot of their interviews, but I honestly don't think Hiroyuki Imaishi is aware of the words. So the results are kind of middle ground. Background Studio Bihor, led by Masanobu Nomura, had worked with Trigger in the past to paint BNA's Anima City, but now they were back to take the realistic 4K ray-traced world of Night City and transform the colours and lights to make everything pop. They're the same locations, sure, but they evoke an entirely different feeling. The same went for the character designs. This is what CDPR's senior concept artist at the time cooked up for David before Yo Yoshinari transformed him into the character we have today. In fact, despite some noble attempts in the character creator, Yoshinari's designs aren't even close to what's in the games either, with the designer instead focusing on distinct silhouettes and body shapes. And I reckon there's a lesson here. Do anime versions of video games really need to look like their source material? Actually, do they need to have the same story for that matter? Persona 5's animation errors and Danganronpa's rushed story were both the result of anime staff feeling like they needed to adapt the games as accurately as possible, even though they admit it was a pain in the ass. Hell, Spike Chunsoft even asked the Danganronpa team to create a new story, and the director refused. In the wake of Edgerunners, despite not having the same characters or story, Cyberpunk 2077 faced a massive, unexpected resurgence in players. On a personal level, I played the game a few months back and wasn't a big fan. I thought the city felt too empty, the combat didn't encourage experimentation, and moments of great writing were hard to find. But even after all of that, watching Cyberpunk Edgerunners was enough to gaslight me into thinking, hey, maybe I was too harsh.
You're breathtaking! You're all breathtaking!
Edgerunners isn't just one of the best shows of the year, it's also a guide for how games producers should interact with anime companies. With the success of Castlevania, there was already a boom in companies announcing their own games adaptations, but few have had the same impact, some got moved over to US studios, and most never came out. Getting a production like this one isn't just a matter of spending more money, it's about respecting anime as more than a brand and more than a marketing opportunity. Rafal Yaki and his team got it right. I just hope others in the future do too. Thanks for watching the Canipa Effect. I couldn't fit it into the main video, but holy shit, the ED animation is so good in this. Mai Yoneyama's been building such a huge career as an independent illustrator and animator, she has almost 1 million followers on Twitter, that I thought she'd never return to TV anime, but it's so cool to see her come back for this. But before I go, I'd like to thank these breathtaking people for supporting the channel. In particular, I'd like to thank Alan Baquero, Austin Hardwick, Biopower, Chris Boylan, Dedameat, Eddie Lehecka, Faux Wizard, Frizzy Canadian, Frogkun, Fujay, Jacob Bosley, JR Pictures, Mike Tamborelli, My Own Mother, Rylan Taylor, Studyoy, Tomer Aman, and Tiago Nesimentu.